Hello, everyone.
Hello.
Hi, Thomas. Hello.
Let's maybe give it a couple of more minutes to see if we have any more people joining. It also gives me a chance to pull up the right documents here. All right, I'll put a link to the Google Docs with the meeting notes in the meeting chat, so please record. Please record if you're present in the table. Do we have anyone who would be willing to make notes this time?
I can again help you taking some notes if possible.
Yeah, thanks, Georg. Appreciate it. And do we have any new friends here who want to introduce themselves?
Hello. I'm not sure if I've been on previous calls, but yeah, hello, I'm Jack. I work at Control Plane. I have an interest in building software. I'm familiar with some of the hardening steps that we take in Nix packages where we build a bunch of software. And I just want to double check that everything we've got is in this document and everything in the document is also added to what we've got. But yeah, nice to meet you all.
Nice to meet you too, and welcome. You were also commenting on some of these open pull requests, right? Earlier.
Yes. Yes.
Yes. Excellent. Thank you very much for the input there.
No problem.
So what I would actually suggest that we have a number of these open pull requests, and I think it would be like a good to check in on the status of those. I had a quick look through them yesterday and tried to make some notes into the agenda. But also, if anyone has any other opens they want to record, please go ahead and note them into the meeting notes. But I thought that we could maybe sort of really coldly just go through these pull requests in like the order they were submitted and see how we are doing. I think we had the changes related to the now my brain is escaping me. I just came from chairing another 2-hour workshop, so I'm getting reclimatized. But we got the pull request from Sidesh merged from last week on the on some of the hardening options, and then we have what we also had this number 128, which was the glib-cxx assertions option that was initially submitted by David, and I did some suggestions in a separate pull requests number 142 to sort of bring this section aligned so that we provide the corresponding information both for the GCC provided C++ standard library and the LLVM standard library implementations. But maybe like one of my concerns were that I hope that I didn't sort of broaden the scope of this unnecessarily. But maybe you can give your impressions, David, on how you feel about the state of this, if you haven't had a chance to have a look at the.
I'll be honest, I haven't had a chance to look at your proposal, so I'm sorry, so go ahead.
Should I pull up this should I pull up this pull request and we can have a look?
Let's go ahead and just talk through this together. Sure.
Yeah. Let's see if I can get this get the code change. I'm not sure whether the actual diff is like the easiest way of do it, but we can give it a shot. I hope you don't mind if I share my screen here. Where is my Firefox window? Okay, I hope that this is visible to everyone now. So
it's a little small. You might want to do either Control plus or Command plus to
yeah,
zoom
thanks. Is it better now?
Much better, thank you.
Yeah. Yep. So I think that the background for this was basically this in your original pull request. We had this offline discussion about whether this is when this feature was added to GCC and whether when it was added to CLang. But because this is this is effectively like a macro definition that's passed to the underlying C++ standard library header, I don't think that it's like really dependent on the version of GCC as such or the version of CLang, but it's more dependent on the version of the underlying C++ standard library. And this glib-cxx assertions is really only relevant for GCC standard library implementation. But then there is this corresponding libcpp assert for the LLVMs implementation. So I did a little bit of digging and noted down some of my observations in the original thread, and then I tried to integrate this as part of the other pull requests on your original branch. And basically I have sort of two sets of changes. So and there's some input from Kelly Jack 2 on some additional suggestions, which we can also go through, but I can sort of briefly note the changes that I did first. So the first commit basically adds this. So change the attribution for this not for GCC and Clang, but basically call out libstd C++ and libc++ with the corresponding versions, and then add the libcpp assert option both into the main table and then this and then the sort of the feature specific description. And I sort of had then the sort of like the other change I was proposing, which is also on the other commit here, is that a lot of the documentation around this, they don't call this out as specific runtime bounds checking for C++ strings, but they talk about this precondition checks. And how it seems to be like for this LLVM, they specifically only use this for constant time precondition checks, which supposedly is for performance reasons. Whereas then for this GCCs, I think it's a little bit more complex, and I think it's also like in both cases, this has also evolved over time. So I think that you also had like some references to potential performance impact, and I think that is like very dependent on which version you are using and what assertions this actually enables. But basically the synopsis and then the performance implications have been sort of restructured based on that it covers both cases. Like one thing that I was a little bit sort of I was sort of going a bit back and forth in my mind was that, so also like this note here in the main table that can impact performance. And I wonder that we have like a lot of options that can potentially impact performance. So I wonder that if we list it in like the main table, is that at least now we are not doing it consistently. So I guess that this is sort of at least something that I wanted to brought up, that do we feel it's necessarily to point this out for specific options, and in that case, what criteria do we use, or are we happy with just having the performance implication section for each of them and sort of like deferring the description there? Yeah, go ahead, Sirob.
As the CPU guy in the room, we are constantly asked about performance and if there's ever any trade-offs. So I would recommend that this group consider adding that could impact performance qualifier. I think that's important to note for people because we get a ton of questions about that. Okay, so just to be clear, so your suggestion is that we should add it for also the other options. I think if we know and it's provable, I think we definitely should provide that feedback for people as they're kind of weighing their options. Right. Yeah, I suppose then that, go ahead.
Yeah, I would say, I would agree. I agree with Krob, and I would say the details go into the performance, into that section, performance analysis, whatever. There's no way you can summarize that in a high level table, but having, can impact performance and then all the details down below, seems like the right call, unless it's like, can severely impact performance or something like that, which hopefully very few of these do. I think Krob's absolutely right. Performance matters, and in particular, really, the reason most people write code in C is, most is probably too hard, but many people choose C specifically because they're worried about performance. So it's a very, very relevant issue for many. Mm-hmm.
So then maybe like a follow-up to this would then be that, should we just sort of use this for all the options that have an impact on like code, like, so if you emit checks? But I think that this is sort of a little bit what I'm struggling with this, right? So because a lot of these mechanisms are trying to minimize the performance impact, right? So it would be maybe helpful if we can come up with some criteria for where we actually then note this and where we are not noting it, or should we note it for everything that has like an emit some code as additional checks. I don't know, do you have an opinion on this, Siddesh?
Yeah, so from CPU perspective, there are flags that add overhead all over the place. And then there are flags that add overhead at specific points. Like for example, if you have frame pointers, frame pointer flags add or remove overhead all over the place, like at every single function call. Whereas things like glibc XX assertions or libc pp assert or 45 source for that matter, they may add overhead at specific points in the library. So the scope is very, very limited. So when you document performance overhead concerns about them, it's necessary to add that caveat as well, because it's the kind of stuff that won't be visible on like a general kind of slowdown. Like you won't see it in spec, for example. You will have to do application workload specific tests to find out what the actual impact is, because otherwise you're not going to see that overhead at all.
Yeah, it's a little bit tricky, right? So do we want to sort of be verbose about this and sort of point it out if there are like potential cases where it can impact performance, and just highlight in these high level tables? But then, as you said, there should be maybe like this reference to the specific sections where you should get a better idea of where like the corner cases and where like the problematic cases lie.
Yeah, I mean, like for flags that impact like all of CodeGen, it makes sense to add performance overhead, or like a brief may impact performance kind of note. But for everything else, I think we should stick to only the details where you say that there may be overhead in some very specific cases, but in general, it should not be noticeable. Because from past experience, I've realized that there's a tendency to kind of be alarmed at any kind of any mention of performance, and because of that, there's this reticence to using that flag instead of actually doing those additional tests, because testing for performance impact or for glibc XX assertions, for example, is going to be it's not something that would be possible at the hardware vendor level. It's going to have to be at the application vendor level, where the application vendor looks at their workloads and decides whether their workloads get impacted by that the assertion flags or the fortification flags. It cannot be done at a general purpose level.
Yeah. Jack, you have a comment?
Yeah, maybe just like a general comment about like getting worried and kind of premature optimization, that kind of thing might be useful. Just kind of encouraging people to turn on the flags, run benchmarks, and actually see if this impacts them in a real way. Because yeah, it's all well and good seeing, some synthetic test says it's a big deal and someone says this isn't a big deal, but depending on what your actual code does, you should probably measure something. So yeah, just encouraging people to try it and benchmark and get some real numbers might be a good idea.
Right, and I think that we have sort of like the way we were trying to address this was that we had this sort of this separation into like these two tables, one which is sort of reserved for the warnings that don't have, that you can be sure that don't have any impact, and then the other and then the other table which is the options that have some kind of impact on the generated code. But I guess that then, based on this discussion, it would seem that there would also be like an interest to do like some kind of like more fine-grained division within that second table on like which of these we should note that like you should really, you know, test for your performance impact. But then presumably the impact on the specific sections is not maybe that big, because we already have this performance implication subsection for each of them. There's also a comment in the chat. So GDR says, part of the safety and security issues we have in the C++ community are caused by excessive focus on performance, even when they don't matter, without having numbers in hand.
Yeah, I think that's been one of the issues. I mean, things like Stack Protector, for example, they're accepted as being a necessary security mitigation, and it has a slowdown associated with it, but it almost never comes up today because it's an old technology, so it doesn't really come up today as a performance concern, because all applications have absorbed that performance overhead, and they've kind of moved beyond it and trying to do other things. So yeah, but the focus on performance is necessary, but I think we probably need to take these things into these like application-specific contexts into focus when we do this.
So would it be, so in order to go forward this, would it be sort of fruitful if we review the text, what we say about this testing, and maybe we can emphasize that further, and maybe it will be useful to then have some kind of proposal on this, that which options should have this performance impact note in the in at least this recommended options table, and then we can discuss specific options, whether based on some initial proposal. Yeah, thumbs up.
Yeah, you beat me to it. I was typing that in.
All right. But how about if I then, if I try to make an initial stab at this, and I put up a PR just in draft mode with no intent on merging it yet, and we can have an offline discussion on this, that I'll put some proposal and we can discuss it, that which one should have and which one should have, and then we can review in a future meeting.
That sounds good to me. We can talk on the PR, or we can converse kind of asynchronous in Slack.
Yeah,
good idea.
All right, I think maybe that gives us maybe a more focused discussion around specific options then going forward. Are there any other notes on this now on the PR 128 or 142, or do we feel that this goes into the right direction? I saw that Jack has also contributed something to this, partly cosmetic, but thanks for the fixes. Did you have any comments on the content itself?
No comments on the content. Yeah, it looked good to me. Yeah, all my comments here are aesthetic, really.
Yeah, still valuable. Thanks a lot for those. So how do we feel? Is this new section is this new section ready to be merged, or is there still any open concerns about this? I take the silence as this is then looking good so far.
Yeah, I have no concerns.
All right. Then we can probably move on to the.
You want to go ahead and merge it now and just declare victory? I think you've got the agreement, right?
I'm not sure whether I think Krob asked access for me yesterday, but I think I haven't gotten a confirmation email yet.
I can push the button if we'd like.
Yeah, please go ahead. Please go ahead if you
push the button.
That's my specialty. It's the value I add to the group. I can push a button.
You and me both, sir.
Someone's got to do it.
That's right. Just
but
make sure.
As I said, Thomas, hopefully we'll hear back from operations today to get you the permission so that you can go ahead and do that in the future.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, thanks a lot for the help. I can also contribute and doing this housekeeping after this meeting. So then next one was 132, and this we already briefly talked about.
What was that?
There's a pencil button, and I was curious what it does, and that's what it does.
Now I have graffiti on my screen.
I got to figure out how to get rid of it.
Yeah. So this was this GCC V section that was proposed by Randall, and I think that we were overall happy with this, at least during the last meeting. But I think that one sort of thing that came out of the discussion was that we should add a recommendation to explicitly enable the hardening flags on the command line rather than rely on the default profile or distro defaults. And I think we decided that it could go into the same PR. But sorry, I didn't go ahead and update this. So maybe this is still something that we can work on offline. But are there any? I think that we have like a little bit of a different set of participants this time. So I don't know if there are any other comments on this 132.
So is this about flags that are inherited from like when you build GCC that then get kind of preserved into future builds, or?
Exactly.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
Yes.
Because in terms of specifying stuff by hand, I'd say, yeah, if you're just kind of picking up these flags from GCC itself, it's probably best to just set it yourself as well. But for certain distributions, they'll have like a builder abstraction where you just say, I'm going to be compiling something that is C or C++, and that abstraction will turn on a bunch of flags for you. So that would probably be a case where I'd say, okay, you don't need to add the flags for what might be a third time.
Yeah, I think that this is like something that we had a little bit of sort of discussion previously on the scope of this document, and we, like, based on those discussions, at least of my takeaway has been that we sort of felt that we want to a little bit stay away from the distro discussions, because the distro, of course, have their own ways of managing these already. And this guide is maybe more geared towards the developers who are doing their building themselves rather than packaging for distros, right? So the best source of information for how to package for distros is, of course, with the distros themselves. And we don't want to repeat that information. But of course, we can take inspiration from what the distros are doing in what we should cover here.
Another thing to add to that was that as a packager, my intent with this was that I noticed that a lot of people use the distro containers just because they're easy and they're CI/CD and they get GCC through app or whatever they're using, just because it's simply easier. And it's just one of those things that we wanted to put it in there, that if you are going to do that, just make sure that you are aware that there could be things that are turned on by default. But what Thomas said is that when we discussed it, we kind of figured that there's not a whole lot of evil by duplicating flags. So yeah.
And then Randa also started compiling this very nice document on the default configurations in different distributions, which can have some value on its own, even though it's a little bit outside the scope of this guide document as well. The link to that should be in the meeting notes.
And also, Thomas, this, just to add more to this also comes from my background, like in packaging, where a lot of people just think, okay, I'm going to download GCC and it should be inherently secure. Because I see a lot of that attitude in packaging, that they think that because you're getting it from Debian has a responsibility to basically have your back or enable sane security flags. But the definition of sane obviously differs from group to group to group. So
yeah, that's an excellent point. Yeah, go ahead, Jack.
So with the like compiled set of defaults for different distros, is that going to live somewhere separate from this document? I'm just worried it might get out of sync quite quickly.
we were talking about making it an appendix, but that's kind of why we also then kind of decided that this would be better, because just because of the fact that, yeah, it would get out of date and somebody would have to maintain it. And at the end of the day, it's kind of an edge case, for this document. So, yeah.
So I guess this would be, rather than going through and grabbing all this, we can just teach someone how to do it themselves.
Correct.
Okay, awesome. And then something that's not quite related, but I feel is tangential, is maybe a mention on not duplication of flags, but the ordering of flags. I found that like -w all and then like setting levels for other things, certain flags override other flag values, and it's important to get the order correct.
Yeah, that's actually an excellent point. So this was also, I was also like wondering about this, that I have a to-do on myself to check what happens if you do stack protector strong, but then do like regular stack protector after that. So which one takes precedence? So is this the better one, or is it the one that specify last?
Yeah,
I don't know if someone already knows the answer offhand, but otherwise, I think that this is on my to-do list to check.
We'll probably get to this a bit later on some of the next PRs, but I was doing a bit of research, and I found someone trying to reproduce an example, and it wasn't working because they did strict overflow 5 and then WAL, and WAL is overwriting that value. So you had to have it the right way around. But we'll get into that later.
Yeah. Do we warn about that?
Sorry, what was that?
Do we warn about that somewhere? We might want to.
Oh, about the ordering. I haven't read everything, but I don't think so.
I don't think so either.
I don't think so either.
Yeah, I mean, you're right, but I don't think we say it. And if we don't say it, someone may not realize it.
And I think a quick mention of it in the TLDR would be good, because if someone's just grabbing the flags and then they edit it slightly, they might completely ruin it.
Right.
Yeah, I think that we have quite a lot of this related discussion, so maybe we can take a stab at this and using this PR132 add these additional aspects to it and continue the discussion there. But I think that overall, I think the direction seems to be seems to be good. I think we have also just add this additional observation to the caveats, and then we can review this again in the next call. I don't know if anyone, if no one else volunteers, I'd be happy to take a stab at this wording as well. But how do you feel, Randall? You made the initial suggestion. Did you want to continue on this? Not sure if you're not audible if you're saying anything, but maybe I can take a stab at this and we can continue in the comments. I'm gonna move on to the next one in the interest of time. So next one is citations to documents calling for hardening 136. And now Zoom covered my window, but I think we are. It's this one here, right? Files changed. And somewhere there should be like the rich diff. Okay, but this is actually quite readable like this.
Yeah. So just in general, I think we should be citing information, for the particular flags. If we knew something, these are citations that other people think it's a good idea to have these kinds of flags. So hopefully that'll help convince people that, oh, this is a good idea in general.
Yeah,
that's all this does.
I'm also very happy with this suggestion. One sort of tangential discussion, I think there was some discussion in the comments, was that we don't have a very consistent citation style, and I take full responsibility for that because initially I did this numbering, which is of course like a very bad idea when we are adding citations in the middle. So what I would sort of suggest that we sort of try to stick to these source and year style citations where possible, or then the document identifier where not, and we can in sort of slowly maybe move the other citations to this style, but as long as the links aren't broken, I think that we can manage this as long as the new ones are added.
Huge fan of author date. Let's do that. But I would say let's review this as it is. It uses the existing format, and then we can have a separate change for switching around to author date format. I agree with you, by the way, on author date. 1, 2, 3 doesn't really clear anything.
Yeah, that was. I will admit that was laziness on my part since I did the initial. Initial conversion in a batch mode from the original Word document. So sorry about that.
Oh no apologies necessary. This is a common format. I agree with you. The advantages of the other. So just on this, I'm hoping this is a straightforward one. It's just, hopefully we all agree that hardening is good. This just adds some citations that say other people say hardening is good.
Yeah. Krob had some comments on the citation. In-text citation may be easier. This isn't an academic paper.
Yeah. We can harness the power of the internet. Since it's a web page and you can click on it, you can get right to that source cited, as opposed to having a long appendix or a table with all your footnote.
Yeah, actually, I if you don't mind, I'm going to disagree with a little bit here because that's all true as long as nobody ever changes links.
Well, that never happens.
That never happens. Yeah. What was it? 1/3 of all Supreme Court links don't work anymore already. So I think it's valuable to have a list in the bottom, not if, but when the links get screwed up, so you can find more.
Well, I think in text is simple. It's very common on the web. And then if we want to have a works cited page saying this was our source material or inspiration or related works, I think that's acceptable too. But either way, you have administrative work if things ever change.
Right, but that's okay. This one literally is. I would do that as a separate step. Right now, this is just adding the citations using the existing citation format. And I would propose let's argue separately the how to change the citation format.
Sure.
And walk through that. I do agree with you that if you can click and jump straight to it, that's awesome.
I'm not up on my current MLA style guide.
So
yeah,
it is possible to have in Markdown your text with a link and then define the link somewhere else. So you could have all of the links defined kind of in this format as we've got. But instead of doing the reference, we just do square bracket text, square bracket link reference.
But that's still like an inline, right? So we also have these cases where we have additional descriptive text for some of the links. And I think that this is sort of also the rationale for using the footnote style.
Got it. Okay.
Yeah, but yeah, I'm more in sort of David's camp on this inline versus citation, also partly because of this reason that we can add this additional information. And I think that if you use the inline, if you use the citations, you also get this works cited page for free effectively, because those are put at the end of the document automatically. But yeah, maybe also like in the interest of time, on my side, I'm happy with this change, and maybe we can put the citation style holy wars on the agenda for a future meeting and
there
continue.
We go. Yeah. I think that sounds like the right.
Sounds great.
Yeah. So I guess that if there is no concerns about the content here, I guess this one is also ready to be merged.
All right, I'll push the button.
Yeah.
Ready.
And then we have one more,
139.
Yeah.
And I'm hoping that we can eventually get this in, because there's some other proposed changes I suspect we can make that look a lot like this one. But I didn't want to do them all because I wanted to see how if this was the right direction before. Basically, the Linux kernel has a couple flags that change what code is generated, because what they found was that there's some constructs that if you just optimize out, you're basically creating vulnerabilities. So while in general you want to optimize as much as you can, there are some checks which, if you optimize them away, they're likely to lead to a vulnerability. This one is basically removing, deleting null pointer checks. Null pointer checks in most cases are basically free anyway. I mean, you either have them in the register or in a cache. So while technically this is a performance impact, it's usually nearly zero because it's in a cache line or in a register. But all too often the compiler realizes that, oh, if it was null, it'd be undefined behavior, and programmers never make mistakes. So we'll just remove the check. And this has resulted previously in vulnerabilities, which is why the kernel folks enable this. And you can see the details here. And I even included a code example in the sample code, because I think it's easy to understand with the code example and hard to understand without it.
Yeah, from my side, I think this seems like a valuable thing. I don't have first-hand experience with this, so I feel that I cannot really comment on like the value outside the Linux kernel. So if anyone has any opinions, I think that would be valuable. But it seems like a reasonable addition. Yeah, go ahead, Sidesh.
In fact, it looks like a pattern that the compiler should be looking more closely at. So I would probably file a bug in GCC or basically have someone on my team look at this a little closer and see if we can actually detect and warn about this.
That would be good, but that comes down to detecting UBs. Whoops, and we have other folks.
Right.
Yeah, I think GDR was first, so please go ahead.
Oh, yeah, I was going to say that this is in the same bucket as, let's say, -F, no strict aliasing, and a bunch of other flags that were added later when the optimizer folks started exploring optimizations to generate better code, and they have been very problematic for the kernel code. So even if we can still convince our friends over in the GCC development to fix some of the bugs, there's a general problem here, which is that kernel code is very different from application code. And in kernel code, like in this example, there are things that are happening at the hardware level. You know what is going on, but they don't really follow the rules of the C abstract machine. So I don't know how you can fix this without getting to other problem. I would recommend for kernel to explicitly add these things. And if we don't have it already, we should also add no strict aliasing.
If I may respond real quick, I'd rather talk about each flag completely separately on its own. I'm not talking about aliasing here. I'm specifically talking about deleting null pointer checks. I don't have academic data, but checking for null pointers is pretty much a universal in C code. I don't think it's kernel unique at all to say, have some function that says, first check if it's null. If it is, do something. If it isn't, do something else. I also don't think it's unusual at all to have a declare a variable where you set its value based on some computation. And unfortunately, that computation could actually accidentally dereference a null pointer. That's what's happening in this particular example right here. So while I agree with you that kernel code is different from from application code, I don't think that the problem in this particular flag is unique to kernel code at all. If you look at the example, we've got a dereference of dev followed by is dev null or not. And unfortunately, that's an easy mistake to make in any C code. And therefore, I think this flag applies to any C code as well.
Okay, I will push back a little bit on that.
Please do.
So what you're talking about here, talking about here is, it is the same bucket as strict aliasing. I understand. I agree with your argument that we should discuss each of these options separately. I agree with that, but I want to push back on the structure of the arguments. What is happening is that the program has undefined behavior.
Right.
Okay, so when you have the dereference there, what is happening is that there is an implicit assumption that says this pointer is not null.
Right.
And then the optimization goes on and start pushing those assumptions, those implicit assumptions down the control flow graph. Whether it is explicit, remove the an explicit check there, or some other assumptions that come from having that null pointer being null, is like you can't just say, oh, always put it there, it'll be okay. And then because you have this flag, then the compiler would not optimize in a way that surprises you. And I would hate that we put in here a recommendation plus a reasoning that makes people believe that because they have those options, they have those compiler options, and because of the code pattern, nothing bad will happen.
Oh, I don't think I think if somebody comes into this document thinking they're going to do that, it's a fail to start with. And if they maybe we to make maybe we need to modify the text to make that clearer.
Yeah,
In my mind, the goal is to reduce the likelihood or impact of vulnerabilities. That's all we're doing. We're not guaranteeing. If you want guarantees, there are formal methods. Go use them.
Yes. Okay. In that case, that's what I'm saying. In that case, like that code explicitly has undefined behavior.
Sure.
And it has.
Yeah, it has undefined behavior. But guess what? Most C code has undefined behavior. It's hard to not have undefined behavior. I assume with a large C base, there's thousands of undefined behaviors. And the problem, strictly speaking, from a standards point of view, you shouldn't have undefined behaviors. But since they happen and happen constantly,
that's not my argument.
Oh, okay. All right.
That's not my argument. Yes, I know I'm on the C standard or C standards committee and I do lawyering there, but here I'm talking about what actually happens in practice. In practice, people write code by copy and paste.
Mm-hmm.
Right. That's what they do. But if we're telling them, oh, this pattern is okay as long as you have.
I never said that. And
I know you didn't say that. I'm looking at the structure. So there is what you and me say because we're experts and we're supposed to give people advice. And then there is the structure of what we're telling people. That's what I'm worried about. I'm not worried about what you're literally saying. I'm worried about the pattern of our, the structure of arguments and how we're rationalizing this. That's where I'm coming from.
Okay, so let's hear from Jack now, and then I'd like to make a proposal related to this. But go ahead, Jack, you had a comment.
Yeah, there was some points earlier about similar flags, and I linked this paper that David linked. And yeah, I agree going through them individually would be good. Working out if they are generally useful or just useful for things like a kernel would be good. With some of these in the paper, there are examples for non-kernel usages. And there's also a little table that explains projects that use certain flags. So some of these are turned on by Postgres, and maybe they have specific reasons that we could look at for that. What else was I going to say? Yeah, someone mentioned getting a warning about when the optimization happens if it isn't turned off completely. I don't know if there's a warning specifically for this flag, no delete, null pointer checks, but I started looking into no strict overflow, and there is a warning that you can get for when it does do an optimization on that one. We could check if there is a warning. So even if people don't turn off the optimization, maybe they can get a warning that it's happened, and then they can review if it was appropriate and that kind of thing.
Yeah, the warning suggestion was basically to add a new feature to the compiler, not use an existing warning flag. So I suggested finding a bug in GCC and LLVM to.
But what would be the new feature?
Flag. So the new feature would essentially look at a pointer being dereferenced before it was. It compares before it is compared with a null or a specific value to kind of short circuit it. So instead of assuming that the pointer is non-null, you basically add a diagnostic where it checks if lower down in the control flow graph there is a check for that pointer to verify if it is null.
I think that sounds like a good, if I may, I think that sounds like a good idea. I mean, if somebody wants to file it, that's great. I think that's outside the scope of what we can do. I mean, obviously, we can't commit
True.
the GCC folks to make that change. That they'll have to make that decision. So I would say,
I can push them. That's something that I could do.
Right, and they'll be awesome. And I think that's a good idea. That said, I think we're stuck. You know, with what we're doing, we're stuck with recommending options for the compilers that exist, and for that, I think this helps.
Yeah, and getting to this. So what it seems to me based on this discussion is that it's sort of like a flag that's like in a little bit of the category as the flags we are currently covering in this document, because it has these specific implications on undefined behavior under certain optimizations. So I think we already discussed earlier on that, right, now we have these sort of like two tables, which is like warnings and the sort of the bona fide hardening options that have like a security rationale, so to speak. And at least from my side, I wouldn't see any reason why we couldn't have yet a third table that would maybe have the scope that covers like these are like the options that have an impact in these specific cases. If this touches upon you, you should consider using them. And that might also like help in structuring this document as well. And then we can still have the description of this. So I
don't understand the separation. In both cases, for the performance ones, they're specifically to change the code to make it harder to attack. This option is exactly the same thing. There are other options that counter buffer overflows. Buffer overflows are also undefined behavior. So they're all undefined behavior. But what's the difference?
Yeah, not all undefined behavior are created equal. I'm not trying to minimize one or the other. I think what we need to do is to actually encourage options that expose these issues. I know we have to have defense in breadth and in depth, okay? But what we need to recommend are options that expose these problems before they get compiled. Because I'm very much familiar with this. Like I said before, I spent 17 years of my life working explicitly on GCC. I'm very much familiar with this code. And that, as we put in the chat, that paper that you linked to was actually one of the things that provoked the creation of the C++ study group on undefined behavior. And I was the founding chair of it for 10 years. And I only stepped down last December. What I've seen in practice is why I'm having this pushback. It's not that I'm like, I don't like, hey, if we can just have, built-in suspenders, it won't be great. It's what it provokes in practice. That's why I'm pushing back.
Gotcha.
We have also a comment from Sidesh, and then I think we need to continue this discussion maybe next time. But I think that it's clearly something that's a bit contentious. So I think that we need to, continue this and try to understand each other's viewpoints. And I think that maybe what would be helpful is, because I'm also like, I sort of feel that there is some difference here, but I think that maybe if we can try to articulate what that difference exactly is, that might be a way forward. But go ahead, Sidesh, you had a closing comment.
So I wanted to elaborate on the difference between something like fno delete null pointer checks, or for that matter, even the new option ftrivial auto validate, right? So what these options do is that they make undefined behavior defined and allow program execution to continue as if nothing happened. Whereas the buffer overflow checks or any of the other undefined behavior checks mitigate by immediately terminating execution of the application. So that is the key difference between the two. So what the first one does is that it allows code that invokes undefined behavior to continue undetected. Whereas the other one doesn't. So I wouldn't discourage the use of fnode delete null pointer checks, but I wouldn't promote them alongside the others, which is why, like Thomas, your idea of having a separate section of such kind of flags, which make programs safer, but they also kind of end up papering over issues. It's necessary, but probably as a separate section and not mixed in with the rest of the security flags.
That's a good clarification. I still think, I would actually agree that having flags that detect the problem and prevent compilation would be better, but we don't have that today. GDR, I'm sorry, I don't know your full name. I love the idea of getting those into the compilers, and once we can get them into the compilers, that's great. Presuming we can trust them that they always detect the problem. In which, if they only work in some cases, then we're back to the ideally detect, but at least limit the damage, because risk is all about likelihood and impact. And if we can reduce the impact, that's good too.
Yeah. I hate to interrupt this very interesting discussion, but I think that we have already people dropping out, so I think that we need to wrap it up. But I think what would be really good if we can sort of offline start to think about this, how we want to represent it. And I think if we can have sort of like a concrete suggestion for that in an upcoming meeting, I think that that might be sort of like a fruitful way forward. But I think that this is, I think this is a really interesting discussion. So I hope we can continue this around some concrete proposal. But thank you very much, everyone, for joining today. And I think there was good progress. I think we got through all the sort of currently open PRs, and we have identified what to work on. And I wish you all a very good continuation for your day, and see you all in 2 weeks. Bye-bye.
Bye.